My name is Warwick Chai. I'm the Director of BNW Consulting. We're the company that make PowerConnect, which is an application that allows you to connect SAP to Splunk. And we've been working on this app for a few years now. And I'll kind of give you some background once I get into my slides about where the application came from and why we're actually not Splunk people and why that's a good thing. I'll just skip through so here's the agenda. I'll just talk very briefly about who we are and where we come from and what BNW stands for. We'll talk about PowerConnect 4 and the Splunk architecture from an application point of view. It's really important. We actually spent a lot of time building our application to adhere to the KISS principle, right? Keeping it as simple as possible, which means we actually rewrote large chunks of Splunk code in the universal forwarder in order to remove them from the solution. Right? That may sound a little bit like heresy, but in the SAP world, we want to keep the application as simple as possible, right? With as few moving pieces as possible, which means we pulled out all the Splunk pieces and we talk directly from SAP into Splunk, and I'll talk about why that's a good thing. I'll talk a little bit about the data sets. That's kind of the most important question that people ask us. What can I do with it? What data can I get out of SAP? And the answer is pretty much everything, right? And anything that SAP has access to internally, we can get access to within our application. And that's actually a really, from an SAP point of view, I'm guessing you all have SAP. That's why everyone's here, but I'm not sure how deep everyone has a knowledge of SAP and the data that's inside it. Just to kind of set the scene from an SAP point of view, SAP has a standard SAP deployment has something like 100,000 tables, somewhere in the order of 500,000, 750,000 API interfaces, and probably north of 2 or 3 million objects that you can call to extract data out of the system, right? I mean, it's an enormous system. It's been in constant development for 40-something years, since the late 70s, and the architecture hasn't changed very much since then. And most customers will tell you that, if we use SAP, it runs, anywhere north of 3/4 of the business, right? Finance, HR, procurement, everything. So being able to get access to that data is quite powerful. The other problem a lot of our customers have is if you go to an SAP customer now and ask them really simple questions like, what is going on inside SAP right now? What's it doing? If there's a problem, where is the problem? Most people can't tell you. They spend, they need a SAP technologist to sit there in the system for half a day or a day to try and pull out all the information and work out what's going on. And producing trending information in SAP is actually really, really difficult. SAP does have products to do it, but not the sort of thing you can install quickly and easily. And that's the other problem we try to solve with our software, is make it as simple to install as possible. To put that in perspective, we're SAP guys. I've been doing SAP 20 plus years. One of my colleagues, Dave, here, has been doing it almost as long as I have. We measure projects in the SAP space in weeks and months, not days, not hours, right? So, an average SAP implementation will last anywhere from a year to 5 years. And a small tactical SAP project will last anywhere from 3 months to 9 months. Okay, our software will install in less than an hour, and will produce results in a Splunk solution in about 10 to 15 minutes after that happens. Right? So, the metrics we're talking about are orders of magnitude different to what we're used to in the SAP space. Now, that may sound really odd to you, but feel free to go and fact check it. The sort of data we can get to, all of the SAP infrastructure data, all the security and audit data, that's probably one of the key use cases for most of our customers is security and audit analysis. Because SAP controls generally the entire finance of most companies want to know what's happening inside SAP, who's accessing the system, who's creating purchase orders, who's releasing purchase orders, who has access to the payroll, and we can analyze that information down to a microscopic level of detail with the information we pull out of SAP. For example, with our software, if you come to me and say, well, we'd like to know what that person did in this system on that day between those hours from that terminal, I can tell you every transaction they ran, what they did, what transactions they executed in SAP. All that information is available to us. And we'll talk about some of the business data. So we really started with infrastructure data originally. We moved on, so mainly IT operational, IT ops data. We moved on to operational security, and now we're adding business data. So who are we? BNW Consulting. We've been in the SAP business for 20 years. I've personally been working with SAP since 1995, which hopefully makes me a lot older than I look. I worked at SAP for 2 years in Germany, and it's fair to say that we understand SAP pretty well. I would hope that 20 years has given us the ability to get to that point. That being said, though, it takes about 10 years to get to the point where you actually understand SAP to any reasonable level of macro detail, because it's such a deep and wide product. SAP produce over I think 400 or 500 products. No one knows them all. We execute technology projects all over the world. We're actually not Splunk guys, and that's actually a really good thing. We're SAP experts. We've been doing this a long time. We know enough about Splunk to be dangerous, but what we really know is SAP, where to find the data in SAP and how to get it into Splunk efficiently. For those, I think you all have SAP, as I said, that's why you're here. SAP as an ERP application enjoys something like 80, 85, 87% of market share in the Forbes Global 2000. Pretty much every customer that turns over north of $1 billion is a potential SAP customer, and in that space, SAP has about 70 or 80% penetration. They have a few competitors, but those competitors fight out over the last remaining 20 or 30%. Right? SAP is by far the dominant ERP, despite Oracle's press. The SAP software that SAP build all sits on top of a common base. So about 12 years ago, SAP decided that they would build a common technology platform, and it's called SAP NetWeaver, and most, not all, but a large majority of the applications sit on top of that technology base. And the reason that's important is because that provides a common platform that we can interface into. Right? So if we write software that talks into that layer, then any data that flows through that layer to the persistent store or up to a functional application that sits on top, we have access to all the data. Right? And I have a video that will explain how that all kind of sits together. So if you need to get that visibility of the data inside SAP, that is really hard to do from outside SAP. One of the things that we discovered when we started working with Splunk is a lot of the Splunk field sales guys would come to us and say, it's just an application, right? We just point us to the logs, and we'll just grab the logs and we'll push them into Splunk. The problem with SAP is it doesn't produce any logs. It produces maybe 2 or 3 logs, and they're all technical in nature, and actually there's 3 logs. They're all technical in nature. 2 of them are binary encoded, so you can't read them anyway. And the one that isn't encoded is just kind of a trace of the binaries when they're executing. It doesn't tell you anything about what the system is up to. Right? So from outside SAP, it's a walled garden, and all the data is very hard to get to. So in our opinion, the only way to get to the data in an efficient manner is to get inside SAP. To do that, obviously, you need to know how to write an application in SAP. That's where our expertise really comes to play. Okay? So PowerConnect as an application runs inside SAP. Once we get inside SAP, we're inside the walled garden. We have access to all the data that SAP has access to, including all the functional data. And it's also a certified SAP application. So it's been vetted by SAP. If you go into the SAP ICC Partner Directory website and do a search for Splunk, ours is the only application that will come up in the listing. You get a listing of one, and that's our application. So how does our application actually work? As I said before, very little data is accessible from the outside, but once we get inside SAP, we have access to basically everything, the APIs, the tables, functions, everything that the SAP application can do inside, we have access to. Right? The language that we wrote the application in is called ABAP. For those of you who don't know, that's SAP's native language. It's a COBOL derivative from the 80s. It still looks like COBOL. Actually, it's a bit of a mix of COBOL and Java and Visual Basic of all things, kind of all cobbled together. It's not pretty, but it works. But SAP have spent about 30 or 40 years building it in. The application architecture for SAP is actually quite advanced, given it was developed 35 odd years ago. It runs in a virtual machine. The language is partially interpreted and partially compiled, which means that you can write one version of the application and it will run on every platform that SAP produces. So Linux, Windows, Solaris, AS400, doesn't really matter, right? And the database is also relevant. There's an abstraction layer, which means that SAP were able to write the application once and then run it on multiple platforms. And that was one of their key selling points for SAP. One was you can run it on multiple platforms. We're agnostic. We don't care if you pick the platform and we'll make it run. The other one was we don't care about the code. So SAP don't license their code. They license the runtime engine. So they give you all the code. So you say, well, this isn't quite right. We want the business process to be slightly different. You can go into SAP and modify the code and make it do whatever you want it to do. And that's what we do. We write our code to run inside SAP. Our solution connects directly to the Splunk via the indexer or, via a heavy forwarder. We can connect to the REST API because we had to in the past, but with the advent of the HTTP event collector or the HEC endpoint, we can inject events directly into the indexes. As I said before, we basically decided that we want to make the solution as simple as possible. We kind of drew a picture and said, well, here are all the pieces that we currently can use, and we crossed out everything that we absolutely could do without, and we basically crossed everything out. We've got SAP and Splunk, and everything in the middle we took out. So we inject the events directly from SAP, directly into the indexer. That can go through a heavy forwarder if you wish, but generally it's direct to Splunk, to the heavy forwarder or to the indexer, but it means that we had to rewrite all of the functionality that a universal forwarder or a heavy forwarder would otherwise provide. Load balancing, we can load balance across, we've tested it across 40 indexes, I think. If an indexer goes down, we take it out, put it on a blacklist. We check its health occasionally. If it comes back online again, we start redistributing data to it. We can spray the data across all the indexes so they all have a copy of it so that it's redundant. We therefore don't need to install anything on the operating system of the running host. For those of you who don't know SAP, you don't have kind of deep knowledge of IT ops for SAP, the reason we did that was very simple. If you go to an SAP customer and say, we want to deploy code into your SAP system, every customer has a mechanism for this because they do it every day. They develop code in development, they move it to quality, we test it, we get some sort of authorization or approval, we move it to production. As every SAP customer does this on a daily basis. If we go to a customer and say we'd like to install a binary on the operating system of a productive SAP system, 50% of the time the answer we know, outright, forget it, can't happen. The other 50% of the time we might be able to argue the point, and I would say about 25% of the time we'll get it across the line. But the majority of the cases the customer will say no. So the easiest thing for us to do is to simply not require it, right? So for two reasons. One is for simplicity, and one is just to remove the need to deploy a binary on the operating system. We just took the universal forwarder out and we talked directly from SAP. But that actually, as I said, required us to rewrite large parts of the universal forwarder in ABAP, which is what we did. Our solution has been tested against all versions of SAP NetWeaver from 7.01 up to 7.5, which is the current version that was released last year. That 7.01 was released in, I think, 2007. So basically, that's every version that's supported by SAP. We've also tested against every version from 6.0 up to 6.4, but given this morning's announcement, we'll have to go out and test against 6.5 and update the slides. But generally, we test our application against a new version of SAP or a new version of Splunk, normally within 2 to 4 weeks of it being released. So it's generally kept up to date. The other big advantage is we use a single code base, which in SAP is actually not that easy because SAP change the compiler as they go. So we have to build one version of the code that works on all versions of SAP, which means there actually is some fancy footwork that goes on in the code when it recompiles itself on a new version. The big benefit for the customer is that if you upgrade your SAP solution from an older version to a newer version, there's no work required with our software. You basically just shut the software down, you upgrade SAP to the newest version, and then you start it up again. That's it. There's no patching required, there's no changes required. It makes it a really low-impact solution for the customer. As I said, it installs in 1 to 2 hours, which in the SAP world is a bit of a minor miracle. No OS-level binaries required. We wrote the universal forwarder inside SAP. And the other one was no external infrastructure, so there's no interface middleware server that we deployed to sit somewhere to ferry messages back and forward. We took that out. It just keeps the whole solution as simple as possible. So that were kind of the founding principles or the goals we tried to achieve, and I think we achieved pretty much all of those inside the solution. This is how the architecture looks. So basically on the left side here, we have SAP, the NetWeaver, there we go, SAP NetWeaver layer. The solution actually installs, so this is the NetWeaver base that sits underneath SAP. Our solution installs into this layer here. And then once it's in there, then any application that might sit on top has to have this NetWeaver layer underneath it. So any data that flows down or up, we can sit in the middle and we can intercept. We also support any database that SAP supports, HANA, Oracle, SQL, MaxDB, DB2. We don't really care. SAP extracts and does a lot of the work for us, but we have specific extractors that can monitor those databases. Normally, SAP will only have one of these applications sitting on top, but it could be any of these applications. And then when we collect the data, we inject it across a logical endpoint. So what that means is, and this is kind of a carryover from our SAP thinking, we can actually ask our software or configure our software to send the data to two completely separate Splunk environments. The reason we do that is because it's very difficult to test our solution against a development system, because development systems don't produce a lot of data. So what we can do is we can configure your SAP production system to send a duplicate of the data once to your Splunk development environment and then one copy to the Splunk production environment. That means that you can test everything. If you have a Splunk upgrade or a version upgrade or a change, then you can test the upgrade here because it's being fed with live production data. Once that's finished, you can break this link and then you can just leave the production feed in place. Once the data arrives at this logical endpoint, we can inject it directly into the indexer, which we generally do, or we can inject it into a heavy forwarder, which can then forward onto an indexer, Splunk Cloud. We've tested against all those types of deployments. We've also tested, obviously, against a single deployment where the indexer and the search head are on a single server, or where it's distributed, we have multiple indexes and the search head sitting over the top. So this is kind of the architecture at a very high level, not quite from space, but certainly from the top of a building. I've got a video that I'll play next that explains the architecture. So I'll step back and we'll let the video play.
SAP software runs on top of the SAP NetWeaver platform. This forms the common base for the majority of the applications written by SAP. PowerConnect is imported into the NetWeaver layer of each system that we need to monitor using the built-in SAP add-on installation tools. Once installed, PowerConnect has access to all of the data and objects that are exposed via the SAP NetWeaver layer, including the API, function modules, iDocs, report writer reports, change documents, CCMS, and even direct access to the tables. SAP saves 100% of the data in the database that sits underneath NetWeaver. This is usually one of the databases shown below. Very little of the SAP data is accessible from outside SAP, so we need to get inside SAP to get the data. Because the SAP application sits on top of the NetWeaver layer, once we're inside it, we have access to all of the data both in the application and above it. Once installed, there are 100 collectors that begin collecting data. Custom ABAP can be integrated to collect any data that ABAP can access. SAP can be configured to talk to many different types of Splunk deployments, including development and production Splunk servers, to allow testing of non-production Splunk servers with production SAP data. Data is duplicated and sent to both Splunk environments. Data can be load balanced across multiple indexers. If an indexer fails, it is removed from the load balancing list and data is no longer distributed to it. Each indexer and its status is checked periodically. When a failed indexer becomes available again, it is added back into the list of available servers and PowerConnect begins to distribute data to the indexer again. Data can be sent to a heavy forwarder, allowing the heavy forwarder to load balance across available indexers or Splunk Cloud. All datasets can be turned on and off. Individual fields inside any dataset can be disabled and the collection interval adjusted for each individual dataset. Each dataset can be directed to different indexes to control retention and archiving rates. Once the SAP data is injected into Splunk, it acts like any other structured Splunk dataset. All of the available Splunk visualization functions can be applied to the SAP data and correlated against the other data being ingested by Splunk. The ability to be up and running in a short period of time using the built-in SAP, ABAP, and Splunk dashboards we deliver as part of the standard package, plus the ability to run ad hoc queries, make this a powerful combination that will help you gain deeper insights into the operation of SAP and the rich data it contains.
Good. Hopefully, between my explanation and the video, it's all clear. The next question people ask us is, what sort of information can I get out of SAP? We started with IT ops data. I mean, that's kind of where our background is, where our heritage is. So we started with the obvious stuff, user metrics, current users, report times. SAP transactions executed, system performance, application performance, web traffic in and out of SAP, information about the database, SAP parameters, all of the SAP application logs, batch jobs, the status of RFC connections between systems, memory utilization. I mean, this stuff is kind of, I would say, obvious, right? It's the first thing you think of when you talk about IT operations from an SAP point of view. What I find really puzzling is with the exception of really large customers, most customers don't have the visibility of these objects inside SAP because the effort required to make the SAP tools provide this information is unnecessarily high, in my opinion. So, we just did a project recently for a division of what was a division of Texaco, and the monitoring solution configuration alone took 45 man days, just to wire up, 12 systems to Solution Manager and produce very basic transport management and IT operations data. If you want to spend 45 days setting this up, look, that's a great idea. But if you're in the business of doing that, that's probably a great idea too. But, I think the time to value for a customer, I think, represents a really poor value. And that's kind of where we started. So if I look at some really basic stuff, this is our landing dashboard. This is actually developed at the request of a customer. We liked it so much we stole it and put it into the product. Well, we built it, so we were allowed to. But it gives you a very high-level overview of all of your systems. We have a customer who has 60-something systems in their SAP production landscape, broken down by region, and they wanted a high-level dashboard that they IT executive leadership team could look at and say, is there a problem with the SAP system? We just want to see traffic lights, and if there is a problem where we have a red light, we can click on it and drill down. So, you can see here that availability is good for all the systems except this one, which must have gone down at some point. Performance is poor across all of them, and the capacity on some of them we have issues. And when you click on them, we use this capacity here. We use CPU, memory, and work process utilization. So if any of these exceed our thresholds, then we get an alert. What we really like about Splunk is two things. Number one is that's not fixed, right? They're all SPL queries. You can rewrite them, you can change them, you can decide that for capacity you want to monitor something else. Great, you just modify the query to extract a different data set out of SAP. The other thing we like about it is once we get the data into Splunk, you have access to all the features and functions that Splunk can provide you. Machine learning, you don't have to use fixed limits. We can use statistical deviations or look for trends. And for an SAP system, that's important because normally on the weekend, SAP systems are lightly utilized, but Monday from 9 till 5, they're heavily utilized. So you really want different thresholds from 9 to 5 than you want on the weekends. Trying to achieve that with standard SAP functionality is actually not that easy. Some of the other things we did, I really like this one, even though it's a simple chart. This is one of the ones you get out of the box. Actually, these are all standard reports. I like this one because it shows you the number of users logged in, which I think is probably a good analogy of the workload from a Monday to Friday, right? So, I think it dips Monday. There's Friday there. Obviously, we don't have quite as many users or quite as much productivity on a Friday. You can see lunchtime here. And you can see, in the morning on a Monday, people are more effective, but as you get further into the week, it starts to level off. Right? So, but our software does this out of the box. SAP doesn't, which is I find it kind of odd. We also monitor all the IT infrastructure underneath SAP. So, CPU utilization, disk performance, network, memory. And some people ask us why we do that, and the reason is very simple. Before I said that we don't require a universal forward or anything underneath the operating system on which SAP sits. If we don't have that, then we may not have access to this data, but SAP records all this information for us. For an enterprise resource planning application that is designed for finance applications and HR, SAP, being German, has done a great job of turning this into a monitoring application. So SAP records not only all of the IT infrastructure of what's happening on the operating system underneath the SAP application, but SAP even records things like the network traffic time. So I can go into SAP and I can find out how long the network is taking between your desktop and the server and back again. right? For an application that was designed for finance and payroll and things like that, that's a surprisingly deep amount of IT infrastructure data. So we want to take advantage of that, right? It's there. If we get it out into our application, then we can do some really interesting stuff. We also have application stats. So SAP, being an old application, from an architectural point of view, it uses a fixed resource model, which, if you design an application today, you probably wouldn't do this. But what it means is that the one weakness that SAP has from an application infrastructure point of view is it has a fixed number of resources, right? So you have 100 processes, and if they all get consumed, then SAP stops working until one of those processes completes and is available for somebody else, right? Which means that if we're all logged in and all those processes get locked up, and you can see that has actually happened on this system, there are times where the utilization has hit 100%. At those times, the system stops working, right? It just stops. And you get an hourglass on your screen, and you have to wait until one of those processes become available. If you did that, if you developed that now, you would make that a threaded application, and you would just keep threading off processes as you need them. But SAP doesn't do that, so it means that we have to keep an eye on the utilization of the processes, because if they get above 90% for prolonged periods of time, you are experiencing a bottleneck at the SAP application infrastructure level. Right? So it's useful to monitor, and we monitor that very easily. We can even, as an extension to that now, we can monitor the utilization of the CPUs or the processors by an individual piece of code. So if you come to me and say, we've got this piece of code that we think is particularly poorly performing, we can run a query and tell you how many CPU cycles or how much DB time or how much memory that individual piece of code is actually consuming. Right? So that level of granularity is available to you. We also have, this one I really like. So we have the ability to monitor the response time of the users both at the front end and the back end. Let me explain the difference. So because SAP uses a fixed resource model, I might spend 10 minutes trying to enter a purchase order. So I enter some data and I look some stuff up, and when I've finally finished entering all the data and I hit save, my client sends all the data to SAP. SAP may take 1 to 2 seconds to process that data, save it to the database, and respond back to me. So the way SAP monitors or measures that response time is what SAP sees, right? From the time I receive the data to the time I try to return it back to you. And the mean measurement for that is 1 to 2 seconds. That's the objective. The problem with that is it doesn't show me what's happening at the user's desktop. It doesn't show me what I'm doing. So what we do in our application is we monitor when a user enters a transaction, and then we monitor when they leave. That tells me not how long did the system take to process, it tells me how long the user spent trying to enter that data. Now, why is that useful? Well, if I've got people spending 270 seconds trying to enter this IT support function, that's 4.5 minutes, right? That might be, if that's a really short function, then there's something wrong here. Either that transaction is poorly constructed, or the people aren't trained properly. For some reason, it's taken them a long time. We can also then, of course, being Splunk, we can drill down on that. Which, if you click on that, I don't have a slide for it, but if you click on it, it shows you the distribution in percentages. So it shows you how many users are 5% faster, 5% slower, 10% faster, 10% slower. So we just see a distribution curve. So we can see the average is 4 minutes, but half of the users were under 4 minutes, the other half were above 4 minutes, and we can see how far in either direction. So we can find out the users that are doing it really quickly, find out the users that are doing it really slow, and then go to them and say, why is it you can do this in 2 minutes, and it takes this guy 5 minutes, right? Either he's doing something different to you, or he doesn't know how to use the system, one of the two, right? So we can measure all this stuff. We can do that for any user on any day, any criteria. We can pick a system, we can pick a date range, we can even pick an individual user if you want to, and say, well, what functions does this user enter, and how long did it take them? One of the other things that we really like is SAP has a huge amount of data about what users are doing inside the system, but it has no way to search the data. There's no way to go in and say, this is data set, in this data set we're looking at normally has somewhere between 10 to 100 million records a day in it. But asking SAP to trawl through that to produce a result or a report is actually very, very difficult. The way SAP stores this data that we're looking at, and for those of you who actually know SAP will know what stat is, it's a circular log, so the head eats the tail, and it's a fixed size. So for a big system, this log only gets kept for anywhere up to 4 to 12 hours, maybe 24 hours maximum. We take this data out every 60 seconds and we inject it into Splunk, so that if SAP overwrites the data, we still have access to it. That gives us two advantages. The first one is we can go back as far as we need in time as the index is set to retain the data. So if the index, this data is stored and is set for a year, 2 years, we can go back for 2 years and search through this data. Obviously hot storage, cold storage, all applies. The other thing we can do is we can do a search for user profiling information by user. So I can actually search for an individual user on a particular time range, and this is showing me all the transactions that they've executed. Response time, so this was the slowest transaction, down to the fastest transaction. This was the transaction they executed the most, down to the transaction they executed the least, right? And that takes, even on a big system, this only takes about 10 or 20 seconds to execute. This allows us to profile a user down to an individual user, down to an individual transaction level, right? And that's something that SAP just isn't designed to do. SAP aggregates this stuff out at an hourly basis. So after an hour, you lose the detail. After a day, it aggregates down to an hour. After a week, it aggregates down to a day, and then to a month. Then after a year, it's gone, right? So the level of detail disappears very, very quickly, and after a year, it's gone altogether. So being able to push it into Splunk and use Splunk's search capability, this is all data model accelerated, so you can search for this very, very quickly. That's actually really useful. So we can do things like, if we profile the user, this is a part of profiling the user login process. We can see users that have had a failed logon, so we can see the number of failed logons in the system. You know, that's kind of interesting. We can see who those users are. But more interestingly, is once we do that, we can find out where those failed logons are coming from. I'm not sure if you can actually see that, but we have access to the IP address and the host name of the user that actually had a failed logon. The reason that's interesting is because SAP, like all security systems, it has a security model built into it. It has a user lockout mechanism. So if you fail a login, you know, after 5, 6, 8 logins, it locks the user out. This is a real problem if someone else is logging your account out or logging a service out, locking a service account out because it's been set up incorrectly somewhere. You try and hit the service a few times, it locks the account out. Being able to backtrack that from the failed login to the user, to the source, allows us to go backwards and find out where that's happening. Then we can fix the problem and stop the user account from being locked out. So after we did the IT operations data, the next thing we did was said, okay, what sort of business data would people want to see in Splunk? SAP has a mechanism in it called change documents. So whenever you create a document in SAP, a sales order, purchase order, an object is created in SAP called a change document. And it's basically an object that says someone created a sales order or created a purchase order. What we do is we tap into that process, and whenever an order is created, we can then extract, we have a configuration that allows us to extract individual fields from that order and send them into Splunk. We can do the same thing for IDOCs. IDOCs that stands for Intermediate Document. It's an SAP native proprietary format. It's actually based on the EDI Fact 4 standard, but it's basically a document with a whole bunch of segments in it. And whenever an SAP system talks to another SAP system, they exchange information using IDOCs. And quite often, if you send information from an external system into SAP, it will be produced as an IDOC inside SAP. Between those two bits of information, we can trap information coming into SAP or moving backwards and forwards between SAP systems from a tactical point of view. Why is that useful? We have a customer that monitors orders coming in from digital channels. So they have 4 or 5 digital channels, B2B, middleware, I think website, and a call center. And then whenever an order gets created in the system, we can pull out the digital channel that all the channels are marked inside the IDOC. There's a field that says it was channel 1, channel 2, channel 3. We can pull out the value and the quantity of the order, and we have a real-time dashboard. So that shows them hour by hour how many orders are coming in on each channel and the dollar value of those orders. Why is that useful? Because they know that they should be receiving roughly 1,000 orders an hour per channel. So if the numbers drop off, they know there's something wrong with the channel. It's broken, right? So it's not used as a line of business reporting tool. It's used as a tactical operations reporting tool. Right? So we're able to see the order flow of individual orders or sales orders, purchase orders, whatever, coming into the system. We also have access to a function called Report Writer. So up here in SAP, SAP has a drag and drop report writing mechanism where you can drag and drop bits of different tables to build a report without cutting any code. You can do that, and then we can call the report, and whatever data the report returns, we store it, JSON convert it, send it to Splunk on your behalf. We also have access to underlying tables if you want to. We have a way of reading a table directly where you can say, show me all the data where the key fields match these particular criteria. We also give you the ability to write your own code if you want to. So if you come to us and say, well, your software has a gap, we have a requirement to do this very specific piece of functionality. If you have ABAP skills, you can actually write a function module. Our framework is completely extensible. You can just call your own function module, and then whatever data it returns, we convert into JSON and send to Splunk on your behalf. So we have access to the infrastructure, the business infrastructure in SAP. We have access to report writer and underlying tables, and if all of that fails and you have to write code, then that's an option too, right? You can write code directly in the SAP system. So look, bringing it all together, we have access to all of the data sources inside SAP, including the underlying tables. We have lots of pre-built functions, about 100. We have dashboards, so we have an app that deploys into Splunk that gives you all of the dashboards out of the box. One of the powerful things is being able to combine all the SAP data under one roof. We hear this a lot from customers, right? Our biggest problem is all the SAP data is in a silo over here, and then everything else is over here, and we want to correlate the two together. So being able to do what we call democratize the data, right? You've got to get it out of the SAP walled garden, and once you get it into Splunk, they're just strings and numbers, right? Like any other piece of data. All of a sudden, it's not special SAP data anymore, it's just information. Once we get it into Splunk, then we can start to do correlations against different sets of data, correlation by time, and that allows you, that really unlocks the data and provides a lot of power. Big one for us is rapid time to value. We measure building data reports, data sets and reports in hours. The ability to run ad hoc queries gives you a lot of functionality. And once the data is inside Splunk, anything Splunk can do, you can do with the data, right? So that's a really powerful thing. SAP and Splunk certified with all current available supported versions. We've tested it at scale. We have a customer that has a 7.5 terabyte database and 2,500 concurrent users, about 8,000 named users, so we know it works at scale. And we can run a report for any time period in the index, right? SAP aggregates this data over a short period of time. So being able to keep that in Splunk. We actually, the way we've configured the application is you can map the data sources in SAP to individual indexes in Splunk. So you might say, well, the IT operations data, we'll put in an IT ops index with a 3-month retention. After 3 months, we don't care. But the audit information, we're going to stick in a different index, and it has a retention of 2 years, 5 years, 7 years, whatever. So you can actually direct the data into different indexes, and because it's in a different index, we can determine the cold storage, the retention periods, all those sorts of things, right? And make use of the Splunk functionality. Okay, so the most common questions I get asked: how much data does PowerConnect send to Splunk? The answer is actually not very much, which probably isn't all that exciting for the Splunk field sales guys to hear, but we're very surgical about the way we extract data from SAP. It's somewhere in the order of 2 to 10 gigabytes a day, which in the Splunk world is kind of microscopically small. Splunk's designed to ingest petabytes of data a day, and we're kind of injecting gigabytes. Obviously, it scales with the size of the system. The more you turn on, the higher it goes. But the biggest customer we have injects about 10 to 12 gigabytes a day. It's not massive. How is it licensed? We use a model very similar to the SAP licensing model in that we only license the production system. So SAP has you have a BAU development landscape, you have development, you have a quality system, you have a production system, a DR system. We only license the production system. So we give you one license and it applies to all those systems, so you don't have to license them all separately. It obviously it affects the ingestion rate. If you hook up all of your systems to Splunk, they're all injecting data, but a normal development system will only inject a few hundred megabytes per day. But one license for production covers all of your non-production systems. Can you do a trial install? Absolutely. You can visit our booth downstairs. We have a license key mechanism, obviously, so we can install it into an SAP environment, and we find a lot of customers want to do that because it's nice to see in a demonstration environment. But the beauty of SAP is the ability to configure it in many different ways. That's how it's sold. If you want to do this or you want to do that or you want to recode it or change the configuration, you can. So most customers want to see how the software works in their environment, and that's something that we can do. The last question is always, is it SAP certified? Absolutely. That is a long, drawn-out, painful process. It took us about 6 months to get the SAP certification. We started in, I think, August last year, July or August last year, and we got certification in January this year. Right? It took us 5.5 months or something, but we do have it. So that's it. at a high level, we have a few customer success stories here. This is PACT Group. They are by American standards, probably quite small, but in Australia they're quite large. They're about a $1.6 billion publicly listed company. Their aim is to grow to $5 billion turnover in 5 years. They're actually on target to do that. There's a quote from the CIO. What they like about it is the ability to use it forensically. They were having a lot of stability issues and performance issues, and what they liked about it was when something went wrong, they were able to go into Splunk even when the SAP system was still down, because we've already shipped all the logs out, and they could be analysing what went wrong with the system while it's down, while it's trying to be fixed. They can be looking at logs, right? So for them, that was the big benefit, not having to wait for the SAP system to come back up or be responsive again before they could do their forensic analysis of what went wrong. SCT Logistics, they're one of the largest privately held refrigerated transport companies. They run a 24/7 SAP system. They actually use SAP for their cross-dock logistics. So they have a scanner on the forklift. So when they drive up and pick up a pallet, it scans the forklift and sends the pickup information directly into SAP. So if SAP stops working for any reason, the entire operation stops. You can't pick anything up with a forklift. You can't put anything onto a truck. Trucks don't move, so their system must be up 24 hours a day. And they had some issues where people weren't using the forklifts properly. They were getting what they felt were misleading information about how many pickups the forklifts were doing per hour. So we were able to write a query really quickly and tell them how many forklift pickups were happening per hour, which forklifts were more active than other forklifts, if people were bypassing processes, because we had all the information. We had the login information, we had all the transaction information, we could combine it together in a query. Writing that query took us about 30 minutes, and then we could see, where the activity was and where the forklifts are more efficient than other forklifts. So that's it. That's a high level. If you're interested, I highly encourage you to come downstairs and speak to Dave or one of the other guys downstairs, and we can certainly show you the application. I didn't want to do it here because we can just show that down on the showroom floor. But I have a DJI drone for the best questions, so I have about 10 minutes, I think. I have 5 minutes. So if I have any questions from the crowd, I am giving away a drone. So if anyone has any questions, do ask. You actually store them in SAP in an archive? Yeah, no, we don't. You could build something, but we don't have anything out of the box, no. Yes?
What about business objects, reports, and business objects universe?
Okay, really good question. We have a Java version of our application which will work for all those. It's currently in beta. We expecting to deploy it productively this year, but it has been tested under Java J2EE and Java Tomcat based SAP applications, and it works. So yes, absolutely, we will have something before the end of the year.
Are you certified for Splunk Cloud?
Oh, that's a good question. I would like to handle that to one of the Splunk guys, but we're not yet. We have been working on this for about 3 months now. So we have a Splunk Cloud instance where we've been doing our testing, and we're waiting for the Splunk Cloud guys to give us the seal of approval. So we know it works, but we're waiting for it to go through formal validation, which has been underway for some time now. Yep.
Do you have any preemptive imaging for example, like on the security side, compliance, or IT side type? Do you have like pre-built images like a class table, like security glass table? IT side glass table, show your SAP environment layouts?
No, we don't. Not glass. If you're talking about ITSI-based glass tables, no. But from a security compliance point of view, yes, we do. We have standard reports that show you, failed logins, or we have a customer that is one of the global tax advisories, and they asked us to build a report looking for suspicious login activity. So they wanted to know, they had, I think, 2 or 3 specific criteria. One was, we want to know if a user logs in from 2 different geographic locations on the same day. based on IP address. So we can do that. And they also wanted to know if a user logs in, or two users log in to the same terminal on the same day, right? Which is possible but unusual, right? It's unusual. I would go away from my desktop, you'd come down and sit down and do something, right? So we have all that information. So they are prepackaged and built in, yes.
Is there a plan to let this data go to EBR to EBA?
No, not at this point.
How does it integrate with SAP?
Good question. So long as there is an SAP instance sitting on top of HANA, then we can use that to get to the HANA data. The only time we can't monitor HANA is if it's a sidecar. We can actually do it by creating a HANA link, DB link from one HANA system to another, but it's a bit ugly, and that's how SAP do it. But I don't like it, so we don't do it. So long as there is an SAP instance sitting on top of HANA, then we have access to all the HANA data. At the moment, the functionality is limited to the HANA performance, the logs, the configuration, things like that. But from a monitoring HANA point of view, if you're talking about the application running on a system with HANA, it's agnostic. Yep.
Do you also have integration with the enterprise service bus, SOA type of infrastructure?
For sending data out or for monitoring an ESB?
Usually, right, SAP may also already have some integration with SOA.
Mm-hmm.
When it comes to CRM or other applications that may not, maybe SAP, maybe Oracle,
Mm-hmm.
like Salesforce.com, etc. Generally, large enterprises, such a service.
We do. We can monitor RFC connectivity and web activity between SAP and a third-party system. Most SAP customers use PI or PO as their messaging bus, and if they do, then our application will either do one of two things. It'll either sit on top of PI or PO and monitor it as a messaging bus, or it can sit outside on the SAP system and monitor the traffic in and out of PI or PO. If it's talking to a pure SOA, WSDL endpoint or REST endpoint, we can still monitor it because we can monitor all of the RFC traffic and the web traffic going in and out of SAP. So most likely, yes.
What's your strategy for the S/4HANA environment, namely with HANA store procedures, native HANA database development?
Good question. SAP obviously, S4 and HANA is the future for them. That's they've gone all in. I think Hasso Plattner was quoted as saying, HANA works or we're dead in the water. So we're currently testing against S4 15.11 and now 16.10 because it's just come out of beta testing. And we will have to recertify our application specifically for S4 because the certification process is completely different to normal NetWeaver Business Suite applications. So we will absolutely support it. The only problem that we will have is we need to understand how SAP will change the NetWeaver architecture with code push down, because the problem with code push down is once you push the code down into HANA, you lose sight of it until it comes back up again. So long as it goes through part of the NetWeaver architecture that we can intercept so we can monitor it, we're fine. But at this point, we're still working through the mechanics of how big a problem that's going to be. I don't think it'll be a huge problem. I had this discussion with a customer this morning, the exact discussion, what will happen when we upgrade to S4. I think the SAP would like S4 to be, across 100% of the customers tomorrow, right? But the reality is that's not going to happen. They've got 300,000 customers to convert. They would like to do it in the next 5 years. That's not going to happen. I think 10 to 15 years maybe. So I think we've got plenty of time to solve that problem, but it is something that we will have to absolutely do because we have to accept that S4 for an SAP perspective is the way forward.
Pull data from Solution Manager as well?
That's a really good question. I think that probably makes you the winner of the drone, but we don't. So SAP uses a very different architecture than we do. So our software deploys into the production system, all of the production systems, and then we aggregate we funnel the data into Splunk. SAP use the managed system monitoring framework, which basically connects all of the SAP systems back to the centralized solution manager system. The problem with this approach is you're limited to the data that SAP produces through the managed system monitoring connection. So if you decide that you want IDOC data or some other data that SAP doesn't pick up, you can't get it, right? Because the solution manager doesn't have it because it wasn't handed it by the source system. So you have two options. One is to go into that source system and write something specific for that data. bring it into Solution Manager, and then you have to use a piece of functionality that I dislike in SAP, BW, because all of the reporting in Solution Manager is BW based. Then you have to build cubes and reports over the top of the cubes, and that becomes a really lengthy process. I would take a guess that to do something simple like number of users logged into a system, if you tried to pin that onto the managed system monitoring framework and then use BW on top of that, that will take you at least 3 to 4 weeks, right? And to me, that's untenable. Yep.
We need to wrap up this time.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.